Okay, so when we look at productivity as a function of the amount of fees generated divided by time, what we're really looking at is productivity on an hourly basis. In other words, you set a metric as to what do I need to produce in each hour for so many hours per day, for so many days per year, to reach that big number, which is all of your expenses, and a little more than that, your bigger number, so that you have a profit, not a loss, so you can pay your personal expenses. So the way you work out the metric is like this. Take the amount that you need to pay all your expenses. So in a previous example in metrics, we said the practice has got 2 dentists and 1 or 2 hygienists, and one dentist produces $500,000 a year, and another dentist produces $400,000 a year, and the 2 hygienists combined produce $300,000 a year. So $500,000, $400,000, $300,000 is $1.2 million. Great. But the expenses are $1 million. And that's the thing that if you're in dentistry, your patients don't realize is how high the expenses are. Because when they go to a hospital, they use their government, card if you're Canadian because it's universal health care, and they don't understand that there's tons and tons of costs in a hospital, but they never see those costs because they never pay for them. They never sign a claim for them. Now, that's until they go traveling to some other country and they end up being in the hospital for a few days because they have an allergic reaction, which is what happened to me. And the bill was $50,000 for me to be in the hospital just for a few days. And that was in Mexico, everybody. That was not in Maui. That was in Mexico. So anyway, the point of the matter is, $1.2 million is the goal. Why? Because the expenses are $1 million and the dentist wants to make $200,000 before taxes. Okay? Great. So what ends up happening is that dentist decides that dentist is going to work 4 days a week, and that dentist is going to work 4 days a week for 45 weeks. Now, why 45 weeks? Well, because 2 of the weeks you're going to take off for statutory holidays. You can't help but take off statutory holidays. It's the law. Okay, now, by the way, you can work in your statutory holidays, but remember we're talking about expense to gross ratios? Your expenses are going to be horrific if you're paying everybody on your staff time and a half. So it's just better to take those days off, and that's what statutory holidays were meant to be in the first place. So then you're going to lose 2 weeks there. So out of 52 weeks, you're down to 50 weeks, which means you're going to take off 5 weeks a year. Now, part of the 5 weeks you're going to take off is going to be for continuing education, which the general worker doesn't need to do. You don't need to continue to take education if you're, working at some other job to keep the job. But in healthcare, we do. So you need to incorporate or budget your continuing education there. So anyway, you're going to have 5 weeks off that aren't statutory holidays, and you're going to have family vacation in there somewhere. You've got 45 weeks times 4 days a week equals 180 work days. You have 180 work days that the practice is open. And out of those 180 work days, you're going to need to produce $1.2 million. Well, that means between the principal dentist and the associate dentist and the 2 hygienists, you've got to figure out how much do I need to produce per day times 180 days. And once I know how much I need to produce per day, remember, productivity is a function of time. Now we have to divide the productivity between effectively 4 producers: principal dentist, associate dentist, first hygienist, second hygienist. So you actually calculate what those numbers are. And with Eric Consulting, we help you calculate those numbers in such a way that it's reasonable. Now, if you figure out for 180 days that I, the principal dentist, have to produce this much per hour, and the associate has to produce this much, and the 2 hygienists each have to produce this much, and you go, wow, that's not possible. We can't do that. Well, guess what? If the amount of fees that you need to pay the expenses is a function of productivity times time, and you can say, I can't produce at that level, then you're going to have to work more hours, which means your practice is going to have to be open 4 days one week, 5 days the next week, or maybe 5 days a week. Or maybe you're going to have to be open some evenings. But if you want to increase your productivity so that your time remains the same, so that you're not becoming a workaholic and you're not having burnout, then what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to say, I need to increase my productivity. And this is where the magic question comes in. The magic question is, how much can somebody produce ethically doing good quality treatment for their patients on a regular basis. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about the fellow that ran the first 4-minute mile. He ran the first 4-minute mile in Vancouver. Okay? And his name was Roger Bannatyne. And when he ran the first 4-minute mile, the person that came in second, who was directly behind him, also ran a sub 4-minute mile. They both crossed the finish line at almost the same time, and they both broke the 4-minute barrier. But see, everybody in the, track and field world thought that it was humanly impossible to run a mile in less than 4 minutes until Roger Bannatyne did it. Now, what was interesting is this mindset that you couldn't run a 4-minute mile was broken. And within the next several months, dozens of people ran faster than 4 minutes in a mile. What are we saying here? We're saying that there's a mindset that you can only go so high. Okay? So the question is, how high can you go? Now, because these videos can conceivably be seen in a public forum, it would be considered unethical, in my opinion, and unprofessional to talk about actual numbers of productivity. So we're not going to. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about comparative productivity using a bar graph. Okay? So if you look behind me, you're going to see bar graphs. And what you're going to see in the first bar graph is what the average dentist was producing about 15 years ago when I was on the economics committee and I was the chairman of the practice management committee. So as a chairman of the practice management committee and being part of the economics committee that makes the fee guide, I was privy to all of the information that dentists sent in terms of their financial totals, where that information got crunched to decide which fees are going to go up and how much they're going to go up in the fee guide. So one of the things that I did learn is what the average productivity was for the average dentist. And I can tell you in the 5 years that I was privy to that information, that number didn't change too terribly much. So if you look behind me, what you're going to see in the bar graph is where the average productivity is. Now, by the way, we all know what average means. Average means middle of the road, which means for every dentist that's doing average, there's somebody that's up here and there's another person that's here. To make an average, there's somebody that's here and there's someone that's here. And to make an average, there's somebody way up here and somebody way down here who might not be working too terribly much, because it's an average. So if you want to be average, then that would be the number that you'd strive towards. And I can't tell you what that number is, sorry. But what I can tell you is that I wasn't striving to be average. So if you look at the bar graph behind me, you're going to see where my practice was after I had purchased it, and I had about 2 years to settle in and start to become busy. So you'll notice that the graph for my productivity is quite a bit higher than what the average was. Well, that's good. But remember, I used to own a contracting company. I used to work in advertising and marketing. I had an extensive business background before I ever went to dental school. So I had an advantage over other people. And I did know how to be efficient. So my hourly productivity was, quite a bit higher than the average. But see, I was in a study club with a senior gentleman who'd been at it for quite some time, and his productivity was really quite amazing. His productivity was quite a bit higher than mine. So I was going, well, gee, how does he do that? So I asked him, and he was a rare gentleman. He gave me some insight. So I came to the conclusion, well, my productivity could be at that number too. In other words, hey, if Roger Bannatyne ran a 4-minute mile, it's possible I can run a 4-minute mile. So if my colleague could do this certain number, which you can see on the screen behind you, then I should be able to do that, right? Okay. Well, you know what? Over a course of a few years, I struggled with that. And you know what? I was doing better than I had before I'd met him, but I wasn't reaching this level that to me was like amazing. But you know what was also amazing is this guy did phenomenal quality dentistry. And I wasn't prepared to ascend to that productivity unless I could do the same level of dentistry that I'd always done. So I had to learn how to be more efficient. And I started studying efficiency. And I started looking into the things that took up my time that were not clinically related, that took up my time that were not patient focused, that took up my time and my energy and my emotion, that didn't contribute to productivity. It actually worked against productivity. And what I started to do was slowly eliminate those things from my practice to the point that I could focus all of my energy, emotion, effort on my patients. And that's where true efficiency comes from. Well, guess what? Once I started to eliminate those things, then my productivity started to go up, 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 up. And now if you look at the screen behind me, you're going to find out what happened with my productivity from about the year 2000 to just before the great crash of 2008. And what you'll notice is that my productivity went significantly higher than that gentleman that I talked about. Now, this is where the weird thing comes in, is because when I used to be in advertising and marketing, and when we would talk about different projects and different contracts and what our sales were, well, that's something that people would celebrate. Hey, you had a very successful month, or hey, you landed that big contract. It's the same thing when I owned a renovations company. I mean, I had upwards of 80 different people that were involved in sales, and my company was actually quite large, but we had 80 people involved with sales, and we would celebrate those people that would get a lot of sales. Well, the crazy thing is, in healthcare, you're not supposed to celebrate that. As a matter of fact, it's a big secret. As a matter of fact, you're not even supposed to talk about it. So I made the silly mistake in lectures I was giving there. I was talking about how I had increased my productivity and actually told people what the numbers were, because it wasn't a public forum. It was all doctors. And you know what? I started finding out that people resented me for it. And all I was trying to do is help them. So, like I say, that really confused me. And I remember going back to Arac Consulting's offices, specifically after, being confronted with this whole idea of resentment. And my secretary, her name was Jan, she cut out a cartoon from the New Yorker. And in the cartoon, it showed St. Peter, who was at the pearly gates of heaven, and this, big lectern with a big book. And there's a guy in a white, like, hospital gown standing in line trying to get into heaven. And St. Peter says, hold on a little bit. We can't let you in because according to this book, you have to go back because you still have some good deeds that have gone unpunished. So why is it that so often if you try to do something to inspire somebody, instead they resent it? Well, actually, that was explained to me by somebody that I did some collaborative work with in Southern California. And this guy's a psychotherapist, and he teaches at UCLA. And he was saying that in human nature, that when it comes to the word intimidation, most of us don't understand what the word intimidation means. Like, we think that intimidation means to, be intimidated by somebody because they're mean, or be intimidated by them because they're a bully. But that's not what the word means, and you can look it up for yourself, online, or Merriam-Webster's dictionary. The word intimidate is actually like a two-sided coin, because what the word intimidate means to either be inspired by somebody who's doing something better than you're currently doing it, and by being inspired, you ascend to their level. Or the flip side of intimidation is to be threatened by the fact that somebody's doing something better than you, and what you want that person to do is you want that person to become lower, or at the very least the same level as you, and ideally lower, because then you feel better about yourself. So here's the thing. If you want to see your productivity go up, as soon as you say to yourself, upon hearing that some other practitioner has better productivity than you've got, you want to be inspired by that and learn how you can ascend to that level. Don't be resentful of it and want to cut them down. And that's the whole idea about something called the tallest poppy syndrome, or in some cultures, they call it the tallest sunflower syndrome. And we're going to talk about that, shortly when we talk about history and the whole idea that if we don't learn from history, then we're doomed to repeat it. But anyway, as it relates to the idea that perhaps somebody can run a 4-minute mile, perhaps somebody can run faster than I can, perhaps somebody can shoot a lower golf score than I can, rather than being upset about it, I should ask them, how can I improve my performance so I can ascend up where you are? And that's what I did with that senior gentleman in the study club I was in. And like I said, he was a rare individual because he helped me out and he wanted to see me succeed. So here's another way to explain this whole dichotomy and paradox about being inspired or being resentful. Imagine that you're driving down the road and you're doing 60. And as you're driving along doing 60, all of a sudden you have to slow down because the car in front of you is only doing 40. Well, you start to get frustrated and you start to go, that idiot, what's he doing going 40? He should be going 60. What's wrong with him? Is he a fool? Doesn't he know that what he's doing is dangerous and people could get hurt? But a passing lane comes along and you end up passing that person. And now you're going down the road doing 60, and 60 is good. Do you know why 60 is good? Because you're doing 60. And if you're doing 60, then you're okay. And everything must be fine because, as the saying goes in pop psychology, I'm okay, you're okay, as long as what you're doing is the same as what I'm doing. See, the human nature is if someone's doing the same as me, they don't intimidate me. They neither inspire me to improve, nor do they create a sense of resentment where I feel inferior. So as long as we're all doing 60, everything's fine. But for that same driver, all of a sudden, some person goes flying past him because that guy's doing 80. And now that same driver goes, what's wrong with that fellow? Is he an idiot? Doesn't he understand going that fast that he could hurt somebody and he's dangerous? Do you get the joke? See, whether someone's going slower than you, well, then they're an idiot. They must be doing something wrong. But if they're going faster than you, then they're also an idiot. They must be doing something wrong. But the fact of the matter is you can drive 80 or 90 or 100, depending on what the speed limit is and depending on how well-tuned your vehicle is. Can it perform at that level? Well, guess what? You can perform at 80 or 90 or 100. You just have to fine-tune everything in your practice and learn how to do it. But if you have the attitude that anybody that's doing less than me must be an idiot and anyone that's doing more than me must be dangerous, you are doomed to stay where you are for the rest of your career. So let's be inspired by people that have learned how to increase their productivity so that you can learn how to increase your productivity. And when you increase your productivity, you're going to have more time off for your family. You'll have more time off to invest with creating bonds of faith and trust with your patients. You're going to pay off your debts and you're not going to have financial stress, and that's also good for your patients. But in order to do that, we're going to have to understand this whole idea of resentment. We're going to have to understand this whole idea that you can only go so high, and we're going to have to break that urban legend because we're going to have to release you to come to the understanding that you can go higher. And we also have to get you to the point of not repeating the same mistakes that your colleagues have been making for years and years and years and years. And that includes me having made some of these same mistakes. Instead, we're going to learn how to overcome these pitfalls and these potholes in the road that would slow down our progress so that we can ascend. And the way we're going to do that is by learning from history. Because as the saying goes, if we don't learn from history, then we're doomed to repeat it.